TX Factor is brought to you in association with Martin Lynch & Sons, the world's favourite ham store. And the Radio Society of Great Britain is proud to sponsor TX Factor. Welcome to episode 23 of TX Factor. In this show, we get in the groove with our very own Mike Marsh as he demonstrates the fine art of mastering and cutting a vinyl disc. Not so much retro, but revolutionary. From sunny Devon to murky Milton Keynes with Graham and Noel on how to build a transceiver station to make contacts via Oscar 100. And our long-awaited review of ICOM's new and exciting VHF-UHF transceiver, the IC9700. All this plus our free-to-enter draws. More details of those later, but first, it's off to Exmouth, where we tread lightly and quietly and sneak into Mike's studio to see what all the din is about. Nice posters, Mike. Well, down here is where all the noise is coming from. Gold discs, very impressive. Oh, bless him. He doesn't even know we're here yet. Oi!
Oh, you caught me out. Tweaking the buttons on my vintage Valve EQ. I was just really trying to see if I could receive anything from SL2. But I realised I haven't got the satellite dish plugged in, so nothing was coming through. Welcome to the crazy world of Mike Marsh mastering, which is kind of like my other shack, really. When I'm not on the mic and on the radios at home in the shack, I'm on the buttons making music in my mastering studio. I started off as a recording engineer back in the day at 17 years old, learning the ropes on the big mixing desk and the analog tape machine, but then very quickly moved into mastering, which is the stage that it's the next stage on from the recording process, where the band have done all the playing, done all the mixing, down to a 2-channel format, ready to launch their music into the outside world. Now, mastering is a kind of unseen process and a big part of the music making process. It's the last part of the production process where you get a chance to actually change the sound and make things sound different. You might get a mix that doesn't sound very good from a studio. This is where you can put that right, hopefully, by using a lot of vintage outboard equipment that I've got in the studio here, and I'm talking about things like Valve EQs, Valve compressors and limiters, as well as modern kind of digital plugins and equipment as well. The two work really well together to make the best sounding end result for the music buying public. Now, when I'm working on an album, I might be working on, say, 10 or 12 different tracks that are recorded maybe all over the world by different engineers in different studios, and they could all sound very different, and more often than not they do. Some sound maybe, too bassy, or they sound too brash or too bright, or the volumes aren't quite right, or the mix balance is a little bit untogether. This is where you do all the gluing. Mastering it's known as a dark art, but it's like the gluing together of a body of work to make a homogeneous end result, so that when you buy an album and put a record on and you play it, either on vinyl or download or whatever it is, or CD, that record sounds consistent from start to finish. When you put it on, you press play, you don't want one track to sound quiet, one track to sound loud, one track to sound bassy, one track to sound trebly or weak or whatever. And sometimes you have to get in there and wind the knobs down hard to get the sound that you're trying to achieve. But that's the beauty of what we do. I love what I do. And it's a little bit like you're an extension of the mix engineer, and you're just helping the music making process sound better all the way down the chain. But You might ask, what on earth has any of this got to do with amateur radio? Well, absolutely nothing, unless you need to make a TV theme tune for a brand new TV show all about amateur radio. And my mates lumbered me with the job of coming up with the music, because that's what I do. So I popped to my friend Rob Perkins, who's got his own home studio, and said, I need to make a TV theme tune. Can you help me out? So, ably helped by a couple of bottles of red wine, on one New Year's Eve at the end of 2013, we wrote and produced and mixed the TX Factor theme tune that you might remember from episode 1. And if you can't remember it, I'm just going to hit play. Brings back good memories. Good mix. Sounded all right. Did the business. And it did the business for like nearly 4 years, but in 2018 the production team decided we need to do a relaunch, we need to freshen the show, we need to make something brand new. So it was a case of out with the old music and in with the new music for 2018 going forwards. We commissioned a young composer, Ed Beasley, to write a brand new piece of radio themed music for TX Factor, and he recorded and mixed it in his studio and then sent me all the individual components of that track so that I could do my thing and mix it in the studio down here. And this is basically what we did. So I'll play the session back and just give you a little visual and an audio idea on how I got the mix to work. Basically I was using Logic Pro X, which is a in-the-box mixing program where you can import all your individual components of the audio that you need to rebalance and re-EQ and re-level and basically remix like you would do on a big mixing desk in a big studio, but you're doing it all within one computer. I spent a lot of time getting the sound of all the individual components of the track sounding as good as they possibly could, and then fine-tuning that balance so that it sounded as punchy and as exciting and as good as it can on maybe your TV speakers or even your hi-fi speakers. I'll show you in a little bit more detail what I was up against with the mix here. I had to work quite hard on all the individual sounds of all the channels, and I didn't use any of my studio outboard mastering equipment. I did everything in the box, working on EQ, working on sound, working on levels to try and get things as good as they possibly could within the mix, which is kind of what every mix engineer should be doing anyway, and not expecting things to be fixed afterwards. So looking at the drums, for example, I wanted to make them sound as big and as fat and as punchy as possible within the mix. So I was able to get in there, you can hear the drum track playing now, with using EQs that I've got on board here and limiters to get them to sound as big and as punchy as they possibly could. And I think we achieved the end result. Now, I don't think the TX Factor theme tune is exactly going to add to my collection of #1 singles, but I do kind of fancy turning it into a record. Take a look at this. Looks like a pizza when I'm pulling it out, but it's a record blank. I think it's time to fire up the lathe and cut a 12-inch single. Just in case you were actually wondering, well, where's the record he's actually cutting, I'm actually just doing some test runs here just to set up the geometry of the lathe to get it to work right for the piece of music that I'm trying to cut. So I'm going through a couple of test procedures, which you've always got to do every time you cut a record. You can't just bung it on and run it. You've got to listen to the audio, you've got to know how long the piece of music is that you're actually cutting. And you've just got to go through the motions of almost like doing a pretend cut. Hang on, don't stop me now, I'm in the thick of it. I'm very precious about my little baby here. This lathe is like 40 years old. It needs a bit of TLC. It was built to last, but you've got to like work in harmony with it, you know? And that's what making music's all about as well. And to get the best out of the format, you can't just sit back and let it roll. You've got to have some sort of passion and involvement with your gear. And when you're mastering records, being at one with your equipment is more crucial than probably your ears or anything on the planet. Right, I'm just doing a scroll there for what will be track 2 on this 12-inch that we're going to cut. The exclusive TX Factor possible #1 single. Here's the old theme tune playing now. I've put the slightly longer version of the theme tune on here just to give you something you've never heard before. So this is an all-exclusive, never heard version of the original TX Factor theme tune. It also happens to be like about 1.5 minutes long, so it's helping me make this look like a fully feature-packed 12-inch single rather than just two 30-second little snippets of music. Yeah, it's all about the visual look as well as the music. So the test run's kind of looking okay. You can't always just set it up in one test run. People often say, why does it take so long to like record music or make a track? You know, it only takes 3 or 4 minutes to play it. There's a lot involved in the music making process, and when you're cutting records, it's a hugely physical process as well. So not only are you dealing with, does anything sound any good, you're actually dealing with a moving, mechanical, physical, wobbling groove that needs TLC. I'm kind of OCD about things sounding great, and unless you do lots of prep work, you ain't going to get a good sounding record. So I need to set the lathe up again for another run. You thought this was going to be a quick fix, right? Well, welcome to my world. Sometimes it can take 2 or 3 hours to get one track to sound good. If you're working on an album, then you can write your whole day off. Okay, well, I'm pretty happy with the technical setup of the lathe now and how it's going to run for the 12-inch single. I've got a test cut acetate here, which I'm going to use because when you make a record, you need to do a test cut before you commit to the sound being okay. This disc actually has got a slight imperfection on it, which I've marked with a Chinagraph mark across the top of a blob, which is a surface imperfection on the disc. So this would never actually get used for finished product, but it's perfect to use for a test cut as long as I don't go through the blob and damage the disc cutting stylus, which would go over the top of it. So I'm going to have to stop the cutting lathe at that point. Turn on the Hoover, which is basically what we call chip removal or swarf removal. When you cut a groove, you've got wastage, and that needs to be gotten rid of. Get the lathe motor rolling and engage it into position. And I'm now going to have to manually get this ready and start the music at the same time. So it's all right, I'll do it all myself, don't worry. Standby Studio, running groove starting. Land the cutting stylus on the disc. Watch this meter here for end of running groove. Start the music. So this is literally just a test cut now. What I'm going to do is play it back on the regular studio turntable just to check that it sounds good, we've got no distortion, there's no jumps in the record, and that's a process you've got to go through every time you make a record. You cannot just run a cut and assume it's going to be okay. All right, let's stop the lathe and remove the disc from the turntable, which is still spinning at 45 RPM here. And its work is done for the moment. Now what I will do with this is have a look at the grooves using the microscope. That's another essential part of cutting a record. Let's turn on the lathe microscope power supply. When you cut grooves into a record, you have to space them correctly for the music program that's there, and you have to make sure that the grooves don't actually run into each other. If they run into each other or they collide, then you're going to have a jumping record. Yeah, so actually the grooves are looking pretty good under the microscope. I'm happy with that. Time to have a little listen on the turntable. Fresh cut, hot wax. This is where it can all go horribly wrong. Standby Studio, needle on the record, and here we go. Well, I think we've definitely got a pretty hot sounding 12-inch single here. We've only made 2 of these today, so they're proper one-offs. You can play them on your turntable, and if you fancy winning one, we're going to bundle one of these in the TX Factor free to enter prize draw. Nick's got all the details coming up next. That's it for me. I've got to go. I've got another session to do now, but in time on a tradition, before I start this next session, it's time for a cup of tea. Where's the tea boy? Oh, there isn't one. Alexa, that's a Builder's tea, white no sugar. Thanks.
I would if I could, but I can't, so I won't.
She's not working either. If you want a job done, do it yourself. Okay, I'll write the music, I'll play the music, I'll mix the music, I'll master the music, I'll make the tea, it's fine.
He's such a sensitive character, but that comes with the territory, I guess. Now, if you'd like to win one of those 2 acetate discs we have to offer, then see our website for how to enter and terms and conditions. Remember, this is in addition to our regular free-to-enter draw, more details of that coming up, so only apply if you'd really appreciate the discs and have the retro gear to play them. Good luck!
Martin Lynch & Sons are always looking to bring you the latest transceivers from the major manufacturers. Not 1, but 3 exciting new rigs are now available at the ML&S shop in Staines near Heathrow Airport. How about Yaesu's new dual-band digital handheld transceiver, the FT3DE, sporting a 5-watt output, 2 independent receivers with simultaneous C4FM digital monitoring. It's got a colour display, Bluetooth capability and a high-res band scope, all as standard. And for the shack, we now have in stock Yaesu's latest rig, the FTDX101D, featuring the HF, 50 and 70 MHz bands with SDR technology providing superior cutting-edge performance. And not forgetting ICOM's new arrival, the long-awaited IC9700 VHF, UHF SDR transceiver with 23 SEMS and D-Star. See these amazing new rigs and much more at Martin Lynch & Sons, the world's favourite ham store.
In early May 2019, I was invited along to the NRC at Bletchley Park to meet our old friends Graham Sherville and Noel Matthews to learn everything there is to know about setting up to receive and transmit signals via Oscar 100.
Graham, we've heard so much about it, but what exactly is Oscar 100?
Oscar 100 is this amazing new transponder payload on the Assail 2 spacecraft. It's about the size of a bus, but our payload on it, of course, is only quite small. Up to now, all amateur satellites have been really very small. The CubeSat here, or the model of the CubeSat, this is a full-size model of FunCube 1. That's 10 centimeters cube. But of course, Oscar 100, which was launched just before Christmas from Cape Canaveral, and is now sitting at approximately 26 degrees east above the equator, and is providing coverage for our radio amateurs, covering almost a third of the world.
Well, it sounds like an incredibly long-term project, so how did it all come about?
Oscar 100 started as a project by the Qatar Amateur Radio Society, who had this opportunity given to them by Asailsat, the broadcast TV company in Qatar. And they worked closely with AMSAT DL, our friends in Germany, to create a specification or a set of requirements to put 2 transponders just for amateur radio on their new spacecraft.
You say 2 transponders, so how are they configured?
The 2 transponders, one is defined as a narrowband transponder and one as a wideband transponder. We'll talk about those in more detail later, but the narrowband transponder is primarily intended for SSB and CW and traditional modes, plus narrowband digital modes, and overall the transponder is 250 kilohertz wide, so there's plenty of room for those sorts of activities. And then the wideband transponder is 8 megahertz wide, so is intended for broadband, wideband digital signals, primarily at the moment digital ATV, and primarily that's DVB-S or DVB-S2, which is very similar to broadcasts that we get in the UK from Sky and other providers.
Some might say, Graham, that it's just another amateur satellite. So why the big fuss?
Oscar 100 is completely new and unique because it's geostationary. It doesn't move in the sky, whereas historically amateur satellites have been an activity carried out by a limited number of radio amateurs who have a passion for satellites. In low Earth orbit, they only appear over the horizon for about 15 minutes at a time. But being geostationary, like any normal broadcast spacecraft, this is above our horizon continuously.
Well, so much for all the history and background to the project. How do we get to receive signals from Oscar 100?
Well, here in the shack, on the receive side, we're using a SDR, a software-defined radio. This one is a Lime SDR Mini. That takes the signal from the LMB out at the dish, and that is it. That feeds a laptop, and we've just got a big screen on here so to make it easy to view, and that shows the spectrum of the downlink of the spacecraft. Over here is the CW beacon, various signals, although it's very quiet this morning, various signals coming through the transponder, and up here is the telemetry beacon, the 400 BPSK, a beacon there. And that is the receiver. The software that we're using here is SDR Console, the latest version of it that has been written by Simon Brown, G4 ELI. It has many enhancements, including a capability to lock the signal to the beacon to help the frequency stability of the LNB. On transmit, we're currently using the 817 operating here on 2 meters, and that is driving the up converter, which is sitting outside by the dish.
Okay, so much for the shack end. Obviously, every satellite receiving system needs an external antenna or a dish. So what do we need to receive Oscar 100, and how tricky is it to set up?
To receive signals from the narrowband transponder on Oscar 100, it really is very simple. A normal sort of size Sky dish with an LMB feeding signals into any of the SDR radios that are available. I have here the Pluto or the AirSpy, also the Lime SDR Mini that we were using inside the shack. Gets you on the air, at least gets you receiving signals literally within minutes. The pointing accuracy required using a dish of this size is not very difficult. The satellite Oscar 100 is located very close to where the Sky signals come from here in the UK. So if you can see signals from Sky, if you have a dish pointing in that direction, it's almost in the same direction, and it really is very easy to line the dish up so that it's working properly.
Well, most of us, I imagine, will want to receive and transmit to have proper QSOs over Oscar 100. Surely the transmit side's going to be a bit more complex?
Yes, we've come outside now to look at the dish that's used for both transmission and reception. And this is a very conventional 90 centimetre dish, bigger than you actually need for transmitting narrowband, but is suitable for reception of the wideband ATV, DATV signals. This is a special feed for the dish. It combines both a patch feed at 2.4 gigs for the uplink with the 10 gig downlink, where the signal is coming down this copper pipe, literally into a modified LMB. And then the transmission is on 2.4 gigs, and that uses this patch at the front. And this is fed with coax from the amplifiers from the up converter below, which converts the 145 meg signal to 2400 megahertz. Well, this one is capable of producing 20 watts. We're running it only at about 5 watts today. So this is another one of the dual band feeds. You see the patch at the front, and the 10 gigs goes through that plastic lens, down the copper pipe, through a piece of genuine plumbing to a modified LMB, which has been modified with the horn to be removed. One of the things we've discovered about the narrowband transponder is that it's really, really sensitive, and only low power is necessary on the uplink to have a good QSO using CW or similar narrowband modes. And in fact, the dish is probably an overkill. Even just using a simple patch like this is more than sufficient. Or even smaller, a printed circuit board patch designed for 2.4 gigs like this one.
So on Oscar 100 there is also a wideband transponder. This transponder is 8 megahertz wide and has been designed specifically for use by wideband digital modes, and at the moment is predominantly used for sending digital amateur television signals. These signals can range in bandwidth from anything we've seen signals as low as 66 kilohertz up to 2 megasymbols. So to receive the digital amateur television signals on Oscar 100, you will need a slightly larger dish as the signals are smaller than on the narrowband segment. We recommend a 1 meter size dish or above. And then you will need a digital TV receiver. A standard consumer TV receiver will be able to receive the beacon which is showing behind me, but for any of the amateur television signals you will probably need a USB receiver which is designed specifically to receive the narrower band signals which are normally transmitted on the satellite. The USB digital television receiver, which is designed specifically to receive the narrower band signals, is available from the British Amateur Television Club and a couple of other sources, and uses software called MiniTuner, which is developed by F6DZP.
Well, that sounds fairly straightforward, Noel. What about the hardware that's required?
This is the station we're using to receive the digital TV signals from the satellite. Here you've got the hardware, which is called a MiniTuner hardware, built as a kit from components supplied by the British Amateur Television Club. And this is the software displaying the beacon, which is on the satellite 24/7. And the software, as well as decoding the picture, also gives us some diagnostics on exactly what's happening with the signal. And so here you've got the constellation of the signal and with the noise. And one of the amazing things is that, as you can see, it's very difficult to see that there's any signal there. And yet this software and hardware can decode a signal even when the signal is so far down in the noise. So to transmit digital amateur television on Oscar 100, you would need an SDR, so something like the Lime SDR, which we talked about previously, receiving. That can also be used to transmit TV. And we would drive the Lime SDR with either the PC software written by the DATV Express team or the BATC ports down unit, which is Raspberry Pi based. And to do television transmit, you will probably need to run 25 to 30 watts as a minimum into a 1 meter dish. So if you can't put up a dish at home, or you want to go and have a listen immediately, the British Amateur Television Club and AMSAT UK have worked together to put a facility online which is hosted by Goonhilly Earth Station in Cornwall, and it is a web SDR system, and at the moment we can hear the CW beacon. And if I just pull down the page, you will see here on the waterfall display we can see the narrowband CW beacon, some SSB stations and the wideband beacon. So as well as the narrowband web SDR, which you can listen to all the signals on, we have also put in a wideband spectrum monitor, which is used for the digital TV operators to be able to see what's happening on the wideband segment. We have the screen displaying the 8 megahertz wide signals, and here you have the 2 megahertz beacon signal and another amateur television signal, which is about 250 kilohertz wide.
Yeah, GT3 PYE portable, here GB3RS. Okay, John, the operator here is Graham, my own call G3VZV. As you will appreciate, we're located at the National Radio Centre at Bletchley Park this morning. The locator here is Italy Oscar 91 Papa X-ray, and I hope you're having the good weather up there that we've got down here today. So back to you, GT3 PYE portable, GB3RS.
GB3RS, GT3 PYE portable. Good morning to you, nice to talk to you on this satellite. I have to say I'm very impressed with it. I've worked lots and lots. Currently we've worked about 14 or 15 DATV stations from here, and something like 60 or 60 flares.
Yeah, nice to hear your voice there, Steve, and greetings from NRC to you, from all the team here. They've been very busy over the bank holiday. It's relatively quiet this morning, so we've got good opportunity to use the NRC to demonstrate this Oscar 100 spacecraft. Anyway, we've got to press on with some of the recording here, so we'll leave the frequency for you. GT3 PYE Portable, GB3RS.
Thank you, Graham and Noel, and all at the NRC for allowing us to film that feature on Oscar 100. And now, our free-to-enter draw. This bundle of prizes is up for grabs for the first entry pulled from the Shack hat. From the RSGB, 2 books to give away, the latest RSGB prefix guide, and AMSATs and Hamsats. And from Martin Lynch & Sons, the amazing new dual-band 5-watt handy from Yaesu. If you'd like to enter to win this bundle, then see our website for instructions and terms and conditions. Good luck! After this word from our sponsor, it's time to review the ICOM IC9700 with Bob.
The Radio Society of Great Britain is proud to be a sponsor of TX Factor. Have you been thinking about joining the RSGB but haven't got round to it yet? Well, here are the top 5 reasons why you should join. As a member, you'll receive a monthly copy of the UK's biggest amateur radio magazine packed with the latest news, reviews and advice. Our website contains exclusive content for members, including convention videos, Radcom archive material, digital versions of Radcom, Radcom Basics and Radcom Plus, and the popular Bletchley Park free admission voucher. As a member, you'll benefit from at least a 15% discount on around 200 amateur radio book titles. Members also receive valuable guidance on planning permission, interference issues and on-air abuse, as well as support in your local area from our dedicated teams of volunteers. And you can take part in over 60 contests, with countless awards to aim for. And all this costs less than £4 per month by direct debit. The RSGB exists to protect, promote and enhance the use, understanding and enjoyment of wireless communication. In both the UK and overseas, we influence government and international policy on radio spectrum matters. Add your voice to ours by becoming a member. We look forward to welcoming you.
Back in episode 7 of TX Factor, which came on the air in February of 2015, I met a veteran amateur radio operator who was still operating and experimenting with digital modes, Ivan Currell, G3WBA. At the time of filming, Ivan was 95 years old and still very much active on the bands. Sadly, Ivan died earlier in 2019, having reached the age of 100 years. Towards the end of Ivan's life, he was very much supported and encouraged by his good friend Malcolm Pitt, G4KPM, who helped keep him on the air during his regular visits to Ivan's shack. However, towards the end of Ivan's life, his failing eyesight made it more and more difficult to see the displays. Well, Ivan, you've been a great inspiration, and all of us at TX Factor send condolences to Ivan's family and friends.
Here we are at ICOM UK to meet a radio that we have met before, the IC7300. Now we know there's lots of these in shacks around the world and we've covered it off in quite a lot of detail in a previous TX Factor. But the reason we're showing you this is because we also want to show you its twin brother, because you've got the HF bands and of course 6 meters and 4 meters covered off in this radio. So what about the bands above that? Well, ICOM's new baby, the IC9700, will solve those problems for you. And to tell us about the radio and to put it through its paces for us, we've got Chris, GKC from ICOM. I think you have had radios in the past from ICOM in a range that looked similar,
yes,
in terms of the design, but what's interesting about the range that you've got here, so you've got your communications receiver version, you've now got your UHF, VHF radio and your HF radio, that menu-wise, they're very similar.
Very, very similar, yes. Yeah, if you're used to using the 7300, you won't have any problems finding your way around the 9700s.
One thing that I notice about this compared with the IC7300, Chris, is that we're displaying two frequencies here. not
Exactly.
one.
It's two independent receivers, which you can configure just by a touch on the screen.
So if it's two completely separate receivers, then we can work in full duplex. In other words, I can transmit on one frequency whilst listening on the other?
Yes, yes. It's got three separate aerial outputs, so you can isolate the transmit and receive aerials quite easily. And yes, you can use it for satellite.
I'm glad you said that, because
Yeah.
that's something I'm very interested in. So how many satellite memories do we have on
You've
this?
got 99 satellite memories. It's very simple to use. Select the menu, select satellite. It comes up with the two frequencies and the functions down the side there. Main, normal, it will track the two receivers.
Okay,
and
so it's all the usual things then. You can have
Yeah.
it track reverse or...
yes, you've got normal or reverse, but very simple. There's no fiddly sort of sub-menus to go into.
And then you just save it, and you can tag it, presumably. You can give it
Yeah.
a name in the memory. So the interesting thing about this then, Chris, is this is a radio that is designed for the amateur bands, specifically for the amateur bands.
Yes, yes. It's got very tight filtering on just the amateur bands. It's not a general coverage receiver, but that's necessary to avoid interference from outside the amateur bands on pages, etc.
And that is an interesting point, though, because a lot of people, they have a UHF, VHF transceiver, and it's wide-banded, and they're very pleased about that. And they say, oh, it's great, I can listen to the marine band as well, and I can work the amateur bands. Problem is, though, I get all this crud on 2 meters, and it can't work any DX because there's a pager up on the hill. So this is the radio that kind of solves that problem.
Very early amateur radios used to have very tight helical filters on the amateur bands, and they performed a lot better than sort of models that came along afterwards that had wide front ends. So I think you do need tight filtering.
So that's what we're saying, is this isn't your scanner for listening to
No,
other bands.
no.
This is for working the DX, working the satellites. And again, the filtering very important for satellites. So you're not
Yeah.
desensing your downlink listening with your
Exactly.
uplink and
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
of that. So the filtering very important. And the performance of this, of course, driven by the fact that it's an SDR.
It is, yeah. It's SDR on 270 and a transverter, down converter to 300 megahertz on 23 SEMS.
Is there another radio available then, Chris, that has 23 SEMS as standard?
No, nothing at the moment. I don't think there ever has been. 23 SEMS has always been an option, and quite an expensive option.
Oh, well, maybe it will stimulate a bit of activity on that band as well.
Yeah, I mean, the 7300 generated a lot of interest on 4 meters, so I think this should do the same for 23 SEMS.
I remember when I first got my IC 7300 that
Yeah.
I found that you could do quite a lot without looking at the manual, because the menu tree, if you like, was fairly intuitive. And I think the same applies for
They've
this radio.
kept the same menu system, yeah.
So how do we get into this then and start adjusting the settings, and what control have we got over it from the
Right,
menus?
you've got a menu button on the front there, and these are more or less the same as the 7300. You've got the band scope, audio scope, voice memories, meter function. You've got satellite mode, which is a new one, memories, scan, memory pad, voice record. You can record CQs and put them on SD card. Then you've got the main set menu where you can configure it normally initially, want to get it sort of to work in the way you want it.
So you've got all those things that we're familiar with, but what else is in here, Chris, that takes us a bit deeper into the controls on this radio?
You'll notice there's a second menu, which we can go to there, which has got some of the functions for D-Star, programming call signs, gateways, etc. You've also got a GPS button there. You can input GPS data on the data socket on the back, or you can manually program your lat and long, which allows you to do a search and find all your local D-Star repeaters, and it'll also tell you how far away the stations are you're working and what bearing they are.
And when we want to get very technical, we hit this button on the end, and that's where we might start setting up stuff for add data or for remote control and some of the
it's
deeper
a very
things.
comprehensive menu. A lot of these things you'll only set once initially. Tailor the receive audio, transmit audio, obviously programming your call signs, configure the network. It's also got a built-in network server, so you can just plug it straight into your router.
Now, I know after we did the feature on the remote control of the IC7300, we had a lot of conversations with people about the setting of that up, because the only slightly tricky bit is setting up your PC as a server and then connecting the radio to it. So it does away with all of that.
Yes, yeah, you can set the radio up internally. The only thing you probably will have to do is play around with your router and open up a few ports, but other than
Makes
that,
it much more straightforward. So you plug this straight into your router. I imagine then that you needed some different software for the remote control for this one, because we've got the 2 receivers in here.
There is a new version that was produced for 7610 and also this model, which allows you to use dual receive.
And is that back compatible though to the 7300?
It's back compatible, but obviously you wouldn't use the features on the 7300.
No, but I was just thinking if you had both radios, you could have the one piece of software.
Just one piece of software.
Fantastic. And it does connect via USB to a PC, so for your data modes and everything else, that's the same as the 7300.
Yeah, it's got USB and it's also got a LAN socket for remote connection.
Yeah, fantastic stuff. That's good. So the interesting thing about this, folks, is while you're saving up for your 9700, if you know somebody else who's got one, maybe he'll let you use his remotely from time to time just to whet your appetite, as long as they give you permission.
Oh, of course. Of course.
Yeah. Having spun the 9700 around then, Chris, the first thing that I noticed compared with its HF brother is there's rather a lot of connectors on the back.
Yep, yeah. You've got an SO239 for 2 metres, then 2 N types, one for 70, the other one for 23 SEMS. Power socket's the same. You've got a bank of 3.5mm sockets here. There's your key jack, remote, and 2 sockets, main and sub, for speaker output. You've got a USB-B socket for connecting to your computer, a 2.5mm data socket, that's for putting in GPS data and taking data out. A standard DIN socket there for analogue interfacing, sort of audio in, audio out.
Which have been on the Icon rigs
since
time immemorial.
That layout has sort of been there since the year dot. Big fan, as you mentioned. You've got a SMA socket there, which you can input a 10 megahertz frequency standard to calibrate the radio against. So you just put in the signal there and you've got 2 menu items which allow you to get the internal reference spot on. And there's your LAN socket for connecting to your router.
So it used to be in the old days that you had a mic socket and an antenna socket, and that was pretty much all your connections. But these days it is all about connectivity, particularly with the data modes. So I think you've got all the angles covered here, Chris. How would you summarise this radio?
Well, it's a brilliant VHF, UHF base station. There's really been nothing to touch it, I don't think, in the past. And for anyone that's serious about VHF operating, it's the one to go for.
Well, thanks for that whistle-stop overview of the IC9700, Chris. But there is one other thing that I think we need to touch on here when we're talking about this, because why do hams love SDRs? It's because of all that signal processing you can do in the software. And so we've got Bob from ICOM, G6KKW, to let us delve in to some of the wonderful things the receiver can do. But just before we do that, Bob, let me just talk about the transmit side, because it's a powerful radio. We've got 100 watts on 2 meters, 75 on 70 SEMS, and 10 watts on 23 SEMS.
Yep.
And I think the designers have worked hard to make sure this has good, clean audio as well.
Yeah, we've found that the transmitted audio is excellent on this radio. As you can see, it's supplied with the HM219, same as the 7300, and I think the audio reports that people are receiving are very similar to the 7300.
So that's great. You've got clear, loud, punchy audio, plenty of power, but on VHF and UHF DXing, it's not all about being the alligator with the big mouth. You've got to have some pretty big ears as well.
Yeah, it's all about the receive.
In order then to demonstrate the sensitivity of this radio, Bob, you've got this bit of kit here, and this is getting out of my knowledge area completely. What the heck is this?
This is a Roden Schwartz radio communication test set, one of the latest ones. We use these outside for setting up and calibrating, that kind of thing. And it gives us very accurate levels, so we can show you weak signal performance.
So you've got a mobile phone there with a recording of somebody calling CQ, which you're using to modulate the signal on here.
Yep.
So we can hear it on the radio, and then you're going to turn down the transmit level from the signal generator so that we can hear how sensitive the radio is. So there he is. So if I go to scope there, you can see the signal on the waterfall down here. So what level is that coming in at the moment, Bob?
That's just 1 microvolt.
Yep.
So that's giving us what? Around about the S5, S6 mark.
All right, turn it down and let's see how low we can get and still hear him.
That's 0.1 of a microvolt.
He's still there.
Yep.
Still hear him down there in the noise.
And let's take him down till he gets really noisy. And then select noise reduction.
Wow.
And that's at 0.1 of a microvolt.
And we can still hear him. So, still very copyable. But what happens if we're working a weak signal like that and we get an interfering carrier or some other interference close to it that wipes it out?
Well, we've got the notch filter, for example. That's pretty spectacular.
Okay, how could we demonstrate that then?
Well, I've put a tone on, which is 200 hertz offset from what we're listening to. So you should be able to hear that making a horrible din at the moment.
Ah, right. I could just about make out the peaks of his modulation there, but can't really hear it. So that's it then, I can't work him, can I? He's not copyable.
No, but if we hit the auto notch.
Wow. Now he's quieter, of course, because that big carrier's holding the AGC down.
Yeah.
Could still work him.
Yeah. Quite remarkable, isn't it?
That is incredible. For that test, Bob, we were on the standard SSB filter, weren't we? But what other filtering have we got?
Well, it's just the same as any other ICOM HF rig. You've got 3 filters. You can custom select any bandwidth.
So we can step through here. That's filter 3. Back to filter 1. How do we adjust the skirts or the other parameters of the filter?
Just hold the filter down, then you select the parameter you want to change, like say bandwidth, and then there's your bandwidth.
Fantastic.
And the offsets is the same as everything.
So we've got a tremendous amount of flexibility you get with an SDR, including that very impressive auto notch that you demonstrated to us, but all those various options for filtering, notching, noise blanking, noise reduction. We heard how effective that was earlier on. It's got inbuilt preamps, but what about external preamps?
You can select, in the menus, you can select to power external preamps via the antenna sort.
So a lot of people are going to want to do that because really that's the place you want your preamp at the antenna, don't you, for the DXing. So those will be powered up the coax from the radio. It does all of that for us. I think really, having had this overview today, it's very much like when we talked about the IC7300 before, that to understand exactly how you could adjust this to your own personal operating preferences, you need to have a good old play with it because there is so much that you can adjust and tailor to your own needs.
Yeah, there's a lot of flexibility hidden within this. Like a lot of modern radios, it looks relatively simple on the outside and you can operate it in a very simple way if you want to, but if you want to get dedicated to a particular mode, something a little bit esoteric, it's got all the functions.
Fantastic. Thanks for showing us around the IC9700.
Thank you, Bob.
Many thanks to all our contributors in this episode. Full show notes and all our past episodes are available at the TX Factor website. And we'd love to hear from you, so do get in touch. Until the next time then, thanks for watching. Cheerio. TX Factor is brought to you in association with Martin Lynch & Sons, the world's favourite ham store. And the Radio Society of Great Britain is proud to sponsor TX Factor.